Good evening. Thousands of young inmates were abused at the Medomsley Detention Centre near Consett in County Durham during a 30-year cycle of brutal violence. Young men, some of them convicted of only minor crimes, were subjected to physical and sexual abuse between the late 1960s and the late 1980s. The prison closed in 1987 and 8 former members of staff were jailed, but questions remained over how the abuse could have happened. Well, today the government told the prison's ombudsman to launch a new independent investigation. Medomsley's many victims hope it might finally give them some answers, as Mark Denton reports.
When Paul walks, he struggles. He's registered disabled.
It's got gradually worse. I'm not nowhere near what I should be at my age.
Paul is 66 now, but sustained injuries that still affect his walking when he was a teenager at the Medomsley Detention Centre near Consett. Open between the 1960s and late 80s, it detained young men between the ages 17 and 21. This man, Christopher Onslow, was a member of staff there and threw bricks at Paul when he was 25 feet in the air on an assault course.
I was struggling to get up the net, and Onslow was throwing missiles at me, throwing bricks, and one of them hit me and I fell off. So at least 20 foot, maybe 25 foot fall. When I was on the floor, a number of the officers were around saying, he's all right, he's winded.
But Paul spent 6 months in a back brace. He considers himself lucky, though, he didn't work in the prison kitchens where Neville Husband, a violent sexual predator, was in charge. 8 former members of staff were convicted of sexual assault and misconduct in a public office. Yet still the questions remain. Today, the Ministry of Justice announced the Prisons and Probation Ombudsman will conduct a special investigation.
How much was known by the prison service, police officers, probation service, and NHS? And when did they know it?
One victim of Neville Husband, who's waived his right to anonymity, welcomed today's developments, but called for a full public inquiry.
An inquiry is an inquiry. This does not have the power to turn around and demand or itself notice to a governor to appear in front of them in a week's time to give evidence.
But Paul believes the investigation announced today could still lead to answers for former inmates.
It was fun and games to those prison officers, and they were open. They did not care about who they hit, who they abused, when. Were they given permission to do that? And who knew, above them knew about it, or, there must have been some level of cover-up.
The investigation is expected to last 18 months, but could be extended if necessary. Mark Denton, BBC Look North.
I'm joined by Dan Farthing from our investigations unit, who's been covering the Medomsley story for the last decade. Dan, there have already been police investigations into the centre. What do we know about it?
Well, in the early 2000s, prison cook Neville Husband was jailed for the multiple rapes of young men. He's since died. Then a decade ago, Durham police reopened their investigations, and it literally opened the floodgates to men coming forward saying they'd been abused. The police discovered a thoroughly brutal regime, with inmates being routinely beaten and sexually abused on what some say was an industrial scale. I was told more than 1,000 men were probably sexually assaulted. 8 former prison officers were convicted, and the police investigation only ended this March.
It is a truly grim story. How significant is today's announcement, though?
Well, even though this isn't a public inquiry, the government telling the prison ombudsman to investigate is probably the next best thing. The ombudsman's role is to find out why the abuse at Medomsley went on for so long and why it was never stopped. Remember, Medomsley was open for 3 decades. Tens of thousands of vulnerable young men were sent there from across the north for relatively minor offences. One teenager, who endured the most awful sexual abuse, had never been in trouble before, and he was sent there for stealing a sweet. Sadly, his story is far from unique. The inquiry team is currently being assembled, but it won't report back until next year at the very earliest.
OK, Dan, thank you.